Frank Darabont has given us some of the most excellent Stephen King adaptations, at a time when these adaptations pop up now and then. From Shawshank Redemption to Green Book to the much controversial The Mist. The first two have won some severe acclaim, but the last adaptation took a lot of critique and fan opposition because of the creative liberties taken. Let's look at some of the significant changes that Frank Darabont made in adapting Stephen King's The Mist. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Building up the storyline. The first thing that becomes clear as we read Stephen King's book is how it builds on the characters, each with its intriguing backstory, and provides some context to the setting. This type of flow in this story can be expected from books, considering they can describe elements of a character in a few words. At the same time, specific descriptions require entire paragraphs to give the reader a visual structure they can reference in terms of the story. However, movies, on the other hand, sometimes have to skip story elements because setting them up would take a significant amount of time. So they would jump to the conclusion and deal with the present situation to ensure it doesn't affect the overall plot anymore, and put across only what is convenient. Interestingly, this is the first comparison we're talking about because this happens with almost any film based on a book. If the Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince adaptation even used 50% of what's in the books, the movie would have ended up being among the best of the series. Frank Darabont has worked on Stephen King adaptations and given us some of the most brilliant adaptations we would have expected. But The Mist has something very different from all those adaptations because there are literal superficial and at times supernatural monsters here. In the book, we see David Drayton dreaming about God and the events following that day. He even mentions God when his son asks him about the mist. We also get a sense of the town based on its tiniest mentions. In my copy of the book, the tentacle monster only pops around the 37th page, which is quite a while later, considering the book was around 100 pages. Now, if we talk about the film, things are way different over here, as we need a proper setting for the town and the townsfolk. And we jump into the monster part of things right around 24 minutes into the 2-hour-long feature. It sounds way too early in comparison, but then it's fair, considering Darabont probably didn't want to keep the people waiting until they saw the nightmarish creatures that show up. Did you guys see the black and white version of the film? That tone gives the monsters a lot more weight and makes them scary. Plus, Darabont himself said that he wanted to make the film in black and white. Drayton and Brent Norton's relationship. Fans of The Walking Dead and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a rather unusual pairing, might have had a crazy moment witnessing some of their favorite stars appear in this film, after Darabont was behind the best of The Walking Dead before the studio tried to make their version of the stories. But Darabont had no connections with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or that we know of, and that does make sense considering the great Andre Braugher plays a complete asshole in the film. However, the film hardly touches upon the history between Thomas Jane's David Drayton and Braugher's Norton. We get the vibe between them, but the book explores a complete history. According to the book, Norton is a wealthy lawyer who does the locals surround an outsider in this town. The local against outsiders thing is something that Norton thinks was the reason that he lost the case against Drayton for a property line dispute. Even though these might sound like some fundamental features, we also realize that Brent and Drayton have a completely opposing relationship set against each other, because Brent ogles Drayton's wife while throwing away swears around Drayton's son that would break a swear jar. That's a lot more than we could have expected when we look at what we saw in the film. The character there comes off as someone who will die at some point, because something about his behavior just gives away that he's a complete prick. Again, there's a clear indication that this is something that we might expect, considering some of Norton's character establishment happens right when we see him interact with Drayton for the first time, over the fallen tree. Meanwhile, during the same interaction in the film, the dialogues push in some of the details regarding their history, which confirms that this character probably won't make it to the film's end. After all, now and then, there are a few characters who start as an asshole in the story and change their personality by the end. But Norton isn't doing that. A different version of Mrs. Carmody. Stephen King is a master at creating some of the craziest characters in literature, and the fact that his books are adapted so often means we see some iconic performances. Even though he might not like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, no one can deny the crazy maniacal performance given by Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance. But then there are the annoying characters who do not help the protagonist in any way. In a book about absolutely crazy-looking monsters killing people, one woman is the main antagonist, and that woman is Mrs. Carmody. There's an exciting development because while most others suffer from fear, Mrs. Carmody's reaction to the monster attack is entirely different. Carmody's behavior and change in persona are very well established in the film compared to the book. In the book, we're continuously given intimations about what she's doing and where she's at, as a sense of keeping us aware that she might be a danger at any time. Only at the very end do we see her become the final danger. In the movie, Darabont puts her in front of everyone in the grocery store, making it more difficult to establish her character, considering every individual responds to her in their manner. At the same time, Drayton manages to give a reaction in the book. Here, in the scene from the film, he has to prove a lot more than himself, as he's pitted against everyone. Fans of the film might have felt that Marcia Gay Harden's performance was somewhat cartoonish until the end. However, that's not exactly true, because it is a grounded performance regarding the individuals we've seen around us. No one can deny that they've seen such vicious, self-righteous people around them. In the book, her persona takes time to grow, which works in terms of her becoming a literary character. This interpretation shows how brilliant Darabont was in his approach to the story, as he managed to tell his version of the story while keeping in mind the material provided by King. Mrs. Carmody and the Killer Bug. Again, returning to Mrs. Carmody and her army of believers in the story, the film takes an approach where the brutality of these characters comes out very smoothly, instead of suddenly growing. In the movie, one of the bug-like creatures sits on Carmody but doesn't do anything to her as she prays. This moment increases the convictions amongst her believers, and the others genuinely fear that she has more control in the room at that very moment. Later, the soldier is tortured and sacrificed right after the checkout girl dies, and we realize the nature of the threat they pose. Right then, they approach Drayton's son Billy for the next sacrifice, and it becomes clear that this has to be stopped. But surprisingly, the book doesn't have anything like this, and we're only concerned until Billy is approached for the sacrifice. Tension is significant in the films. Building it properly is the only way to serve it to the audience. Otherwise, you don't get the desired reaction. Darabont managed to create tension inside the grocery store by keeping Mrs. Carmody's character growth in a specific pattern, and that's why she never leaves the corner of our eyes. This growth in her character plays a significant role in ensuring that she's the prime antagonist, as the monsters only become a means of driving these people to absolute madness. The book, however, managed to ensure that the monsters were the most fearful thing, and Carmody was just a product of the fear. Tentacled alien creature is quite different. Depicting the monsters and creatures on screens affects the audience based on how detailed you keep these characters. When we think of the Predator or the aliens from Ridley Scott films, we have specific information which makes them scarier because we know what that feature is. At the same time, we also witness that some creatures in films don't appear in their form. Take The Thing, for example. We never saw this killer alien being, but honestly, the random forms it managed to take in the film at various points were enough to scare us. The fact that King kept the mist as a mystery, and the creatures appear quite a while after the attack, leaves us wondering how they look. But when they occur for the first time and attack the bag boy, we're treated with pure horror. Even Drayton's description was enough to give us a clear idea that this creature was otherworldly. While Drayton tells us that the beast has a spine and other features in the book, Darabont first shows us some weird-looking tentacles, and we wonder what these can do to harm humans. But lo and behold, the tentacles open, and sharp spines appear, stamping the boy and leaving a massive wound. We would have been aware of what we were looking at if the spines appeared right away, but the suspense he plays with when the tentacles open up makes it one step more scarier than we would have expected. Detailing of the grocery store. The setting of the entire event plays a significant role in the film and the book, as the grocery store is where the characters are almost all of the time. The depiction is filled with details, according to Stephen King in the book, that adhere to every aspect of his writing. Even the film approaches the grocery store in a manner that allows us to always wonder what might happen here next, and who we think about at the very next moment. King fills the novel with almost every grocery item that could stick to his style, and that does mean that we will get to see some condoms, because it's not a King novel if there's no reference to sex. The sense of being stuck in the grocery store because we don't have a firm idea about what's happening outside is very well delivered when we read the book, but the film shows us everything, which is what cinema is all about. But still, that makes everything clear to us, and somehow reduces the fear of being stuck in that space waiting for your fate. How different is Amanda's story? Amanda Dumfries is another pivotal character in the feature, and she's quite a significant one in the novel too. Although there aren't some critical differences in her character between the two mediums, the tiny elements make up for some exciting developments. One thing about the book was that it was straightforward about its approach to the characters, and they showed their colors right away with the minor descriptions, giving us an idea of how things would go. In the book, Amanda is from out of town and accidentally becomes part of this ordeal. Still, the movie shows us that she had recently moved into the city, which allowed some development between her and Drayton's character. The moment when the survivors are debating whether Carmody and her army of believers will tend toward human sacrifice or not, the book shows that Amanda agrees to it. But the movie gives us an Amanda who rejects the thought because she thinks humans won't resort to such outlandish means. This reaction complements the character growth of Mrs. Carmody. The film perfectly manages to look at the innocence in her character. She comes from the city and probably belongs to the middle class, but she doesn't have a fair idea about the individuals around her. It sticks to the narrative it created, and this minor element is enough to show how her decisions differ slightly from her book version. Being a Stephen King story, the novel does mention sex between Drayton and Amanda, but the film scraps that and indicates some chemistry between the two. Origin of the Mist and the Monsters. Now we come to the bit that refers to the element of the story that might be a significant inspiration for the Upside Down from Stranger Things. Yes, the creatures and their origins are something that is never really clearly explained in both the materials, but one of these does give us a little bit more insight than the others, and this insight could be very well molded into the answer that we might want regarding the origin of these creatures. The name Project Arrowhead appears in both mediums, and it becomes clear that the military was involved in the monsters invading the town. So in the novella, Drayton hears about the military experiment, and later there's also some random conversation about the military working on some atoms and experimenting on something that went wrong due to the storm. The two soldiers who appear in the store sneak out and commit suicide when the mist takes over the town, and that also confirms that there's some involvement from them. But the film, thanks to Darabont, gives us a little bit more insight and adds another detail that's entirely up to you to consider. Even though the two soldiers are killed, a third soldier is captured by the people at the store and tortured till he gets sacrificed by Mrs. Carmody and her army. He mentioned that there was an experiment in some facility under the Arrowhead Project, and something went wrong and a portal opened. It's annoying when a piece of literature or film gives us a detail that it only partially explains, but Darabont tried to explain this further. One of the deleted scenes from the film involved depicting a lightning surge affecting the Dimension Gate and opening it permanently. This gateway allowed all these horrifying creatures to cross over to our dimension and wreak havoc in the town. While this answers all the questions regarding the monsters, they were never really completed, so it's up to us whether we want to consider them a part of the film. What happened to Drayton's wife? Sometimes it's okay not to show some gruesome character's fate in specific stories involving monsters. The book never really gives us an insight into what happens to Drayton's wife, as even though Drayton manages to find the route back home, it's covered with trees and becomes impossible for him to traverse. We're left wondering about what happened to her, but are sure that she's probably dead. It would be a good spin-off story to see how she survives, but let's assume she died. After all, Drayton cries and gives up, but Darabont didn't want this to go easy. He had to show her fate to us, and it's probably one of the scariest visuals in this visually haunting film. We get to see her spider-webbed body, which confirms that she had died and also makes a statement that it probably wasn't the nicest death in the world. Ending of the movie. The ending is the thing about the film that has sparked numerous debates and is something that Stephen King himself has discussed. King has stated that he prefers this ending in comparison to the one he wrote, and you must be wondering why. Well, according to him, it's anti-Hollywood because it doesn't take the usual happy ending route and serves us something unique and, to be very honest, absolutely mad and horrific. In any other survival story, you'll always see some survivors make it through to the very end and walk into the back, giving us hope of survival. The book gives us the same thing. Drayton, his son, and some other survivors travel south, looking for where the mist hasn't taken over. Fans might know that this leaves us with the possibility of a sequel, which has ruined many franchises and forcefully generated franchises when it wasn't required. But the film, thanks to Darabont, gives us something you would have never expected. None of us did. As they drive away into the mist, Drayton, his son, Amanda Dumfries, Mrs. Ruppler, and another older man come across a monster that doesn't pay heed to them. It was as if the beast knew that they would die anyway, so it didn't want to pay any attention and let them decide on their ending. Well, they did. The car ran out of gas, and they looked at each other as Drayton picked up the gun and shot them all to death, starting with his son. Yes, he killed his son first and then killed each of the other people, but the gun only had 4 bullets, which meant that he couldn't do the same to himself, and this left him in pain and agony. Drayton leaps out of the truck, looking for one of the creatures so that it could kill him. But then the mist clears, and we see an organized army operation passing by as they burn the remnants of these creatures they have managed to kill. Drayton realizes he didn't have to kill those people and his son. The pain doubles as Thomas Jane sells a brilliant performance of someone who had probably made the worst mistake ever. That's it. That's when the film ends. Darabont worked up this ending after a lot of thought. When the director presented it to Stephen King, with whom he was in conversation throughout the process, the author felt envious that he couldn't cook this ending himself. It almost entirely feels like an ending we would have witnessed in the Twilight Zone stories, something that Darabont did take influence from. While Darabont might take credit for this ending himself, it does come from a particular moment in the book. When Drayton manages to salvage a gun at some point, he checks the ammo and thinks to himself that if things go wrong, he'll find a way out. Marvelous verdict. The debate regarding The Mist as an adaptation of Stephen King's work will never end. However, this interpretation and Darabont's take on the story are lessons in adaptations, and the differences we discussed prove that. We see an adaptation of a Stephen King novel into a film almost every other year now. Sometimes it has multiple projects yearly, but nobody has played with the expectations like Darabont did. Even though Darabont has retired from filmmaking for a while, we can only wonder which adaptation of King's work he's cooking up next. Also, if this video made you want to check out the movie again, don't forget to see the black and white one. Maybe it will change your view from the last time you saw it. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!